we've seen so far in this conflict in Ukraine that they were talking about F-16 fighters. Just recently, Denmark said that they were going to send 6 F-16 fighters to Ukraine, but it was postponed for some reasons. How trained are Ukrainians to use these fighters?
They are not as well trained as the other pilots that might be available in other countries like Poland and certainly the United States, countries that have been flying the F-16. So, and it's another thing to be qualified to fly the F-16, but those Ukrainian pilots, assuming that they are going to be flying whatever limited number of airplanes, they're flying in a hot war zone. They are fighting with Russia. Russia's fighting with them. They are going to be flying in a very dangerous environment. So that's where experience comes in handy, obviously. And also, this is the bigger problem, I think. These F-16s normally function with strong, communication support, ground support. There's a battle space awareness. Usually there's a battle space control somewhere that's looking at all of the things that are happening and communicating to the pilots. And that also, of course, complicates what the pilot is dealing with, but it also serves to protect and inform that pilot, so he can evade or take action or whatever he has to do to stay alive. So you take a small number of F-16s and you put inexperienced pilots in them, and you launch them immediately into a very hot war zone, where, in fact, they will be specifically targeted. They're in small numbers, but they will be specifically targeted because the F-16 can carry weapons that will go, can launch deep into Russia, which is the Ukrainians have shown that they're willing to fight, try to bring the war into Russia, behind Russian, the original Russian border. So they're going to be targeted. They're going to be, yes, inexperienced pilots is a problem, but that's not the only problem. In fact, it's probably the third least significant problem. There are more significant problems than just Ukrainian pilots. So it's a very, it's a mess. And I think really honestly, the way things are going now after 2 years, the Western countries, they don't want to see F-16s blown up. But that's exactly what will happen when they go in. And that may or may not happen if it's Ukrainian pilots. Obviously, they would blame the pilots if that was the Ukrainians flying it. But if American pilots were flying them, they would be blown up just the same because there is no ground support. There's no battle space operation to coordinate and to communicate with those pilots. And that's what our guys, American pilots, are going to expect that. They expect that. So the whole thing is just, I think it's a showpiece. I think it's just it's a public gesture rather than actual a war fighting enhancement.
At the end of the day, the Biden administration would go with this decision of sending more and more fighters to Ukraine. How do you see their policy right now?
It's really hard to understand what the policy is, particularly as Biden seems intent on running for president again. So he has an election year. During election years, the guy who can most support peace is always the guy that wins, or the gal. If a woman would win, it would be the same. It would have to be the person who most advocates peace and stability in America and around the world. And so all candidates have to advocate for peace. It would be difficult for Biden to advocate pouring more and more resources into Ukraine when everybody in Washington and everybody in Ukraine and everybody in Russia and everybody in Europe already know that the deck is stacked against Ukraine. They are not going to physically, militarily be able to retake the property that they have lost. They have lost it. They have lost territory. They have lost a certain population in those territories who are now aligned with Russia for sure. They might consider themselves independent citizens of the various Donbass regions, but they are aligned with Russia. Russia is protecting them. They're not going back to Ukraine. And I mean, honestly, could you blame them? I mean, after, since 2014 or longer, they've been being attacked by Kiev and treated badly and told to abandon their various culture or ethnic, habits or proclivities. they've been told they're no good. Now they're protected. Why in the world would the Russians in the Donbass, which is most of them, why would they want to come back to Ukraine? Because Ukraine has not abandoned their philosophy of, well, it's a Nazi philosophy. It is very much a racist kind of philosophy. That's pretty much all that's left that's holding their government together, is this shared ideology of superiority. It's a problem. So anyway, Ukraine is not going to be able to retake that. So Biden, I don't think, wants to be seen, or no candidate would want to be seen as wasting taxpayer money, promoting war and murder. And I think one of the big reasons that the Biden administration is trying to get the Israelis to stop what they're doing, but they're not trying that hard. Obviously, we are paying for it. We're providing them all the weapons that they need, but they're talking at the top level. The newspapers say, "Oh, America, we want you to quit doing this in Gaza." And the reason for that is as that war continues, that taints the political race in the United States, because a president who says, "I'm going to take you to war," never wins. Now, they all lie. I don't know if you remember, or we've all read about, Wilson, President Wilson, elected in, when was it? I guess 1912 or something. I don't know. It was, I forget the election year that he took over, but the Great War was happening in Europe, and the American popular opinion was, stay out of it. We don't understand it. We don't know why they're fighting. We don't want to be a part of that. And Wilson ran, "I will keep you out of the war." That was his slogan. "I will keep America out of the war." The other guy, you elect the other guy, he'll take you to war. "I will keep you out of war." He won. And of course, immediately began working to bring us into that war, which he succeeded in doing at the tail end of it. So, but all presidents, if they want to win, they have to talk peace. So I don't think throwing F-16s into the mix in Ukraine only to have them shot down, which will be very insulting to the American military. It would be upsetting, and it might cause demands for retaliation. Well, none of that is peace, and we have to have people in Washington talking peace during an election year. They don't mean it, but they have to talk about it. So that's why I would say the main thing driving them is the 2024 presidential election. Will it help them? Will it help Biden? Will it hurt Biden? So that's going to be how he frames, how his people frame their actions, I think.
With the way that this battle in Ukraine is going on, it seems that if Russia takes Odessa, Nikolaev, these cities, these key cities that connects Ukraine to the Black Sea, it would be a huge loss on the part of Ukrainians. Nobody knows what's going to happen to the Western Ukraine. As we know right now, there are various ethnicities in that region. Hungarians, Romanians, Poles. What would happen to this landlocked? Is the Biden administration considering that?
Well, that's a good question. I honestly, when we talk about Biden, he's out of it. I mean, he's not considering anything. The guy, I don't know where his mind is. He's lost most of the time. The people around him guiding his foreign policy are neoconservatives. We know this. They are the same neoconservatives that Bush had. They're the same neoconservatives that Obama had. They are the same people with the same idea. They hate Russia. That is an overwhelming drive that they have. Despise Russia, despise Putin. They hate that. And they feel competitive towards Russia, which, it's a little irrational, actually, in many ways. So what they want and what they're thinking, they're not military people. These neocons who are making the policy, they are academics and think tanker type people, but none of them have military experience, except some of the Ukrainian advocates. Like, you remember the Lieutenant Colonel Vindman and his brother? They're half Ukrainians. I think they had dual passports. I'm not sure, but they are Ukrainian patriots who happen to be in the U.S. Army, and one of them happened to be in the National Security Council. He was very concerned and pro-Ukraine. He had possibly, I don't have any respect for Lieutenant Colonel Vindman, but he might have had an idea, and he might be sharing, maybe people like him might be sharing ideas with the neoconservatives. But one thing we know about the neoconservatives is they love chaos. They love chaos, and they are willing to risk, of course, willing to kill people, to kill Ukrainians, to kill other people. They're willing to destroy the environment. as we have seen in Ukraine and any other place that we fight these wars, and put depleted uranium. And we're putting depleted uranium in the black soil that is so productive in Ukraine and in the Donbass too. We're dumping it, we're polluting it so that it won't be usable for years. Honestly, I mean, obviously they can use it, but it's going to be contaminated. It injures the lives of people long after that. We know this from Iraq and other places. So the neocons are not worried about destroying environments. They're not worried about killing people. As long as it's not them, they don't care. They say they believe in democracy, but their actions tell us that they really only like democracies that do what they're told, which means they hope, as they did in 2014, to shape the next political leadership in Ukraine. And it won't be Zelensky. I mean, Zelensky has been this wartime president, but he cannot, first off, they're not going to have peace as long as Zelensky is there. And interestingly enough, the neocons say, oh, we have to get rid of Putin to have peace. Well, of course, that's irrational, but even if Putin disappeared tomorrow, that would not bring peace, because Russia has the upper hand. In fact, Putin is probably one of the key people holding the Russian military back from doing some very damaging things to Ukraine in retaliation for the things Ukraine has been doing. When clear, the way the military people look at this war's lost. Ukraine has lost it. They don't have a good negotiating position, but at least if they stop now, it will be better today than tomorrow, better tomorrow than the day after tomorrow. So Zelensky refuses to participate in this. And this is a crisis for really for the Ukrainians to figure out, because the Americans are, even though I think they're telling him through back channels, they're telling Zelensky, hey, and Zelensky's own generals are probably telling him, we need to stop this. We need to draw a line, end the hostilities, whatever we have to do, because this is killing our country. This is killing what's left of Ukraine, and we can't rebuild it. It is getting, very deadly and unproductive. We need to stop. They're telling him that. He's not listening. To some extent, the Americans are telling him that. He's not listening. So at some point, he will go. Zelensky will have to go. If he goes peaceably, he has, obviously he could do that, or he's going to get killed. It's one or the other. He can either go voluntarily or he will go involuntarily. Now, once he goes, and I hope it's voluntary and I hope it's soon, but whatever, once he's gone from the picture, then whoever rises, the leadership cadres, the circles of leadership within Ukraine, and some of that is Nazi, some of that is Benderites, okay? Some of it is Western-leaning, good Ukrainian people. There's military leaders. The mayor of Kiev, obviously, is someone who's been speaking out. So leaders will emerge, and they will figure out what to do. First thing, of course, that they have to do is stop the war. And maybe, it's possible they could get concessions of some sort. That's what negotiations of ending the war is all about. You can, if you're willing to negotiate, very often, even in a situation like this where Russia has the upper hand, very often both parties can walk away satisfied. And I think there's obviously a way to do that. And as we heard just a couple, 3 weeks ago from one of the Ukrainian negotiators who was in the negotiations a few months after, in 2022, I guess, right? When a couple months after it started, rapid combat movement of troops. And there was a point where they had the discussions in Turkey. And he said the agreement there, it had been agreed to, even by Zelensky and by Putin. But that same agreement won't work now, because now lots of things have happened. More people have died. More has been invested. And there is no backing for Ukraine in 2024. Nothing serious. If you look at the Western papers, which of course lied about that war for 2 solid years, or 18 months for sure, like several months ago, we started, people who were looking at international news or tracking what was happening, all of a sudden we started to see little bits of facts start to be put on the front page of the Washington Post and the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Foreign Affairs Magazine, all these government mouthpieces. And they started to leak out so-called truths, which are meant to change the views of the people in America, to tell them this war is coming to an end. Now, to some extent, that is political. That's driven by the U.S. political election season, the election of our president in next year, next fall. Part of that is because of that. Only people that ever win election in the United States, I don't know about other countries, but in the United States, the guy who says, I'm putting America first, he doesn't have to say it like that, but that's what he has to communicate. And I am going to keep us out of wars, keep you secure and safe and not fighting a war that you don't want. The guy who says that wins the election. And so these newspapers are all backing Biden, or certainly backing the Democrats. So leaking out that information, it could be a total political ploy. But I do think that many in Washington are aware that this war has to end. It's going to have to end with negotiations. And the question is, when will Zelensky go? When will he call it quits, get assassinated, leave the country, whatever he has to do. And then there'll be a struggle for power of some sort, and whoever's left will negotiate. And the problem for the Western-oriented part of Ukraine is not only will they have a leadership struggle, there will be a struggle. It's not unified. There are factions and there'll be a struggle. But the Polish government, while it's very Western-leaning, very pro-war, but the Poles have been thinking about what to do after this war since before it started. So they will be strategically mobile. They will be able to put forth ideas that have been hashed out and make sense. That Ukraine might not like those ideas, but Poland will be in a position to do that. So will Lithuania. Lithuania will be in a position to do that. So it's going to be a mess for the Ukrainians that are left, the smaller country that's there. It's been, I wouldn't say devastated by war, although the people have been devastated. You can't lose 10 million people out of, 35, and then they lost another 3 or 4 million in the Donbass, totally gone, 10 million refugees, and kill 500,000 of your young men. You don't recover from that in one generation. That takes time. And many of the refugees, the women and children who left the country, and some men, but mainly it was women and families, many of them are not coming back. And why would they? Why would they? I mean, some of the, many of the European countries, America, Canada, the countries that have taken these refugees are kind of taking care of them. If they go back to Ukraine to rebuild in a political turmoil situation and again, after wars end, what happens? Recriminations. You're the reason this failed. You're the reason this is a disaster. You're the reason I can't go back to my home. Very tough situation for the society there to recover. And I mean, I hope they negotiate something that's positive for both sides, but it's going to be pretty clear who lost. Ukraine has lost. They attempted to fight a very large neighbor who was serious about what they needed to have for their own security, and they got stomped. So to be, I mean, in the United States, we had a civil war back in 1860, 61 for 4 years. It was very bloody. It was like a precursor to World War I, really. It was that kind of war, trench warfare. It was bad. A lot of civilians were slaughtered. It was done for a number of reasons. It wasn't just on one issue. It was on many issues. There was a cultural difference between the North and the South, a resource difference in how their economies were organized. There's no doubt about that. And at the end of that war, that probably didn't have to happen, but it did happen. And at the end of that, the South was basically under occupation. We had many years of Reconstruction, and it was a time of great hardship because to be a loser in a war, you have a lot to work on to get back to a sense of normalcy. And I would say, many people look at the situation of the Civil War, which happened when, say, 1860s, 150, 160 years ago, whatever it was, a long time ago. And we are still suffering in this country from that. And the South in particular feels abused by the Yankees in the North. It's after 150 years, and we're Americans. We are people from all over. We're not, we're not really like Europeans in many ways. We were the people that left Europe, most of us, or left their other countries, to embrace this America thing. And yet we suffer today from that. So to expect Ukraine, what's left of it, to reform economically, socially, demographically, politically, to expect them to do that rapidly, oh, it's going to be tough. It's going to be very hard. And the sooner and who has the plan for it? Well, I don't think the Ukrainians are planning for it. If they are, they're struggling amongst themselves. But guess who isn't struggling with their plan? Poland, Lithuania, possibly the United States. Britain may have plans, it's just a disaster all the way around. It's very tragic, but I don't think Biden is pushing for more war. I think Biden, even though he could be lying or he doesn't know what he's saying, he says he's running for president. If he is, and if a Democrat takes over after him and runs in some way, if he doesn't make it through the year, it is the peacemakers whoever can take credit for peace who will be elected. And so I think the pressure will be on them not to continue this war in Ukraine. And certainly the pressure's on to get Israel to stop doing what they're doing, which we have no control over them. Well, we do. We do through our aid, our money, all that, our media, which is pretty much controlled by Israel, our mainstream media. But our words say one thing, but our actions are supportive. But at the same time, we still say, please wrap this up, Israel, so that we don't have to deal with it as Americans in our election year.
You talk about the day after Zelensky is gone. These neo-Nazis are so strong in Ukraine, in the western part of Ukraine. The Biden administration or whoever going to be the next president of the US would have some sort of leverage on these neo-Nazis to bring them to some sort of sanity, because it's going to be a huge security problem for Europe and Russia.
I mean, it is going to be a big problem. And I don't know how unified the various neo-Nazi Ukrainians are. You have your I know the Bandera folk, but also there's other I hate to even call them right wing, because it's really has nothing to do with right wing. It has to do with ethnic warfare. It has to do with a superiority complex. And we all we tell people not to be proud, but people are proud and they want to be proud. And these neo-Nazis take advantage of that, and also a country that is devastated. The rise of the National Socialist Party under Hitler, who is, when you say Hitler, we're saying Nazi, right? That's Hitler, Nazi, same thing. But the National Socialist Party that came up, and he emerged as the leader of that party was fueled by people who felt impoverished, disrespected, ignored, and looked down upon and taken advantage of by the rest of Europe, certainly, and to some extent by what was going on in their own country. And why did they feel this way? Because after World War I, Germany was the loser. And it was also blamed, which is, that's convenient, but it's not exactly what should have happened, but it did happen. And the people who are feeling impoverished and are impoverished, people who are suffering, people who have suffered loss in a war and then did not prevail. Because, when you win a war, you fight a war and you win a war, all those little boys that you killed, all your young cousins and your sons, your husbands that you sent there, they're heroes because you won. Okay. But if you lose, they're not heroes. They're martyrs. They're sacrificial, reminders of how much you've given up to get nothing. That's what it is to lose a war. So the situation in Ukraine, now, obviously, in negotiations, maybe this can be, if wise people do the negotiations, and I'm not figuring this out for the first time. Anybody that studies war knows, they understand. The Russians know this. The Ukrainians know this. If they make a good agreement, that people feel that, what, this happened. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't even good, but at least it's over and we can see a sense of a future. If both sides can walk away feeling like that, that'll go a long way to combating the rise of the continued rise, I should say, and the domination of politics by groups like the Nazis and the Banderites, who really are, they're like, it's almost like the mafia in our country. We talk about the mob and the mafia, people that really just make their own rules and terrorize people. And oftentimes after war, what's left is the emergence of power centers and mafioso. So ideally, that would be government bound by a constitution to protect the rights of their people. Ideally, that would be the only mafia that would be good, right? A government mafia. But we don't know what will happen. And it will depend on how much longer Ukraine is being devastated, both, by losing people, losing faith, recognizing that the 10 million refugees in Europe are not returning home to rebuild. And the more damaged it is, the less likely really that huge flows of Western investment will flow into Ukraine. If it gets too damaged, there's a cost benefit ratio that all these investors and asset companies have to look at. So it doesn't look good. I mean, peace should have been pursued a long time ago. And really, I don't want to take Putin's side because I don't know what his side is really. I only know what I observe. But Zelensky, he was popular at one time. Of course, and you remember when he ran for election, we didn't put him in power. We put his predecessor in power. But when Zelensky ran, what did he run on? I'm going to stop all this fighting in the Donbass. We're going to enforce the Minsk agreement so that we can get along with our Russian-speaking ethnic farmers and miners and whatnot who are, live across the river in the Donbass, the large Ukraine that we govern. And he was elected, he was very popular because he ran on a position of peace. He has betrayed that in many ways. And now, I don't know if it's his ego or if his strings are being pulled by people that we don't know, maybe possibly Americans, possibly the Brits, who knows, I don't know what influences him, but he seems very determined to destroy what's left of Ukraine or allow the Russians to do it for him. And this doesn't make sense. And the longer this goes on, the harder it's going to be to rebuild what's left of Ukraine, because it's not going to be as big as it was. It's not going to include the Donbass. They're not going to get Crimea back. They possibly, like you said, if they don't quit now, they will lose access to the Black Sea. If that's what they want, that makes no sense. How are you going to run a country, a landlocked hub, rump country off of Poland and Lithuania? Why would you do that? That's not good for Ukraine. But why can't Zelensky see this? And I don't know why he can't see it. I don't know the details of how he works. He clearly didn't believe anything he said when he got elected 6 years ago or 5 years ago. Whenever he got elected, he lied. Okay, we know that he's a politician. He lied. He proved it. Now what he's doing is it's just hard to say. Is he lying when he says we're going to keep this thing going, or will he suddenly surprise us by coming to the table with the realization that this is the best thing he can do for Ukraine right now? I don't know. I haven't studied him. I don't know where he comes from, his psychology. I don't know.
When you look at this conflict in Ukraine and compare it with what's going on in Gaza, we are witnessing two different ways of fighting. Do you think that this attitude of Putin in Ukraine was part of his strategy to have less casualties on the Russian part, or he was not willing even killing Ukrainians?
People referred to the speech Putin gave, and I think it was the night before, but there had been signs before. I was surprised by it, but I hadn't followed it that closely. Other people knew it was going to happen, but the night before, I think it was, or the day before, Putin gives a very clear speech. And it was very clear as to what he was about and what he was trying to prevent and who he was trying to preserve. And he was very clear about that. And immediately, of course, the West, who had provoked this, had made all these things happen that Putin mentioned. These are intolerable. These are the red lines. The West immediately said, oh my gosh, he's going to Kiev. He's going to go all the way to Poland. Putin's going to go all the way to Paris, and they made this storyline up. But nothing that Putin or his generals ever said, or his mercenaries ever said, had anything to do with it. This was considered to be, as he said, a special military operation, a limited military operation. The other thing that surprised me, and this surprised me a little bit, even though I know early on in the war, Russia's capabilities were being brought up to speed. They didn't start with everything. Their industrial machine had to kick it into gear, and they did that. And the society, they moved in a very strong war footing. But it surprised me that they didn't target these major cities. They didn't target Kiev. They didn't target the Capitol building. They didn't target Zelensky. They didn't target these generals that were way off of the lines in the back. They fought with the guys, they kept this thing localized. And I remember being a little surprised because I said, well, to me, it says Putin is doing what he said. So that's good. You can trust him. In this case, he says something, he does it. Okay, I understand that. And what I didn't realize until later was the Russian people, many of them, not all of them, because obviously there are people that opposed the war and said, why are we even in Ukraine? Who cares? Who cares? But many of the Russians, and I would say the majority, were very angry at Putin, not because he engaged in the special military operation, but because he didn't go far enough, because he tolerated losses and counterattacks from the Ukrainians, even into Russia, which is still happening, without really using the force Russia had, and certainly has today, to bring to bear to stop it. And he hasn't done that. And he still hasn't done that. And I imagine that is he's pressured at home to kill more civilians, not on purpose, but to target these urban areas where civilians live. And if you knock a building down, you're going to kill civilians. I don't care what's in the building, you're going to kill civilians. So there's Putin's approach, which first he stated clearly, and then he followed through with, which is amazing because it's not a mystery. Listen to what he says, watch what he does. They equal each other. Now, in Gaza, in the Israelis, they have a number of problems. One is that the October 7th attack by Hamas seems to have been invited. There's no doubt that you don't pull Israel is a small little place. It has a big military for a small little place. It has borders, okay, that it secures. And they pull their army off 3 hours away. There's nobody there. And then Hamas comes in. They were warned by Egypt, by other countries, by their own intelligence people. Something is happening. We need to beef up to protect. What did they do? Nothing. They did nothing. So in my book, it was politically invited, number one. That's very different than saying that you have a red line, you have legitimate security concerns, as Russia did with this continual bombing of the Donbass, this violation of the Minsk II agreement. Finally, reluctantly, he says, okay, that's it. I can't take it. That's very different up front from inviting in an attack. And it's not a false flag attack because it did happen. It's not made up, but it was certainly facilitated by Israel's government. So that's number one. And then the next thing they did had been long planned. It wasn't, and again, it's hard to compare the way that Israelis view Arabs. Okay. It is, we can't call it Nazism, but it mirrors Nazism in the sense that there is a sense that Israeli people, Jewish people, are superior in every way. And that these Arabs, particularly these Palestinians who lived in that land before it was taken over, are less than human. And when I say less than human, I'm just echoing the words subhuman that is used by a number of the Israeli government leaders in public speeches, even the ones that we hear in America, much less the ones that go on inside of Israel. So there is, if the Banderites hate Russians and they despise Russian culture, okay, that exists. And the Banderites had a role in the government, probably still have a role in the government of Ukraine. And probably, if nothing happens, will continue to have a role in the future Ukraine government. This is a problem. But let's say that's not everybody. That's just a faction. In Israel, it's everybody. The peace voice, the voice for equality of Jews and Arabs, let's say, or those that are not Zionist. If you live in Israel and you're an anti-Zionist and you live in Israel, you are a minute minority. I can probably count you. If you have those views, you keep them quiet, because that is not the majority opinion. The majority opinion is one of Zionism, which says, this is our land. We don't know how you got here. We don't care how you got here, but we want you gone. So October 7th happens, facilitated, I believe, by the government's inaction or vulnerabilities that the government itself created. And we'll find this out too, because the Israeli government itself is wondering why they were so vulnerable to this thing on October 7th. But the reaction was something clearly planned, and it has nothing to do with red lines. It has everything to do with revenge, and it has everything to do with taking Gaza back into Israel proper and reducing the number of Palestinians who can live there. This is why they're killing civilians, because for every civilian, it's not just that they're killing civilians. In 24,000, I think, probably higher, probably 25 now. I mean, I think it's about, it looks like 500 a day. The way the statistics are going, they are still dying. But it's not just the killing of civilians. They're flattening their homes in the north. So let's say they go to a camp in southern Gaza. Let's say they go to a camp in Jordan or in Egypt. Let's say they stay there. Well, when the time comes, for a little while, they stay. Then they say, okay, let's go back to our, what homes? There are no homes. And this is part of the design of the Israeli project. It is to decimate the society, this Palestinian society, Palestinian politics, Palestinian homes, families, and the actual number of Palestinians. And this is their stated goal. We want them gone. So that is, okay, so that's the difference, very much different, between Putin's issue in Ukraine and what Netanyahu's government is doing in Gaza. Now, but the bigger difference, of course, is how the US is reacting, right? So we're funding what Netanyahu is doing. It is our weapons. It is our F-35 squadrons. Well, not ours. We taxpayers funded the purchase of the Israeli Air Force to buy F-35s and many other airplanes and many bombs and the big bunker buster heavy bombs that are designed to go deep and destroy tunnels, of course. Those are all made in America. And we haven't, not only have we not turned that spigot off, we opened it wide to accelerate all of this into Netanyahu's side. And he's prosecuting something that we have been saying that Putin is doing, when Putin clearly isn't doing that. And then when somebody actually targets civilians and actually attempts to decimate, it's a small little strip of land, but they're going to decimate its ability to support human life. Then we say, oh, that's okay. They're defending themselves. That's fine. And you know, and a normal person that looks at America, you have to think, well, I guess it's all about money for them. The Americans care about money. They sell a lot of weapons. They want to sell more weapons. So our taxpayers buy weapons to give to Ukraine. Our taxpayers buy weapons to sell or to give to Israel. And that's really the only consistency. We don't care how you kill your people. We just like to sell weapons. And I mean, if you're not an American, and even if you are an American, I mean, some Americans have come to understand this. But if you're looking at the American behavior from the moon, and you look at what we're doing, we are consistent. If we can sell arms and open up production lines and make money and mark it up, so we get a lot of profit in our defense companies, then we're all for it. We're all for it. Otherwise, we would look like hypocrites, because the side we took in Ukraine, and even the way Ukraine is launching their weapons, and again, some of them aren't super well targeted or targetable, but they are hitting civilian slots. They're consciously hitting schools and churches and things like that in Russia proper, not at the high rate, but when they launch stuff, they don't care what it hits. They are looking for terroristic type destruction, and they don't care about killing civilians. So in that regard, we are supporting Ukraine, who could care less about killing civilians, and we're supporting Netanyahu, who could also care less about killing civilians, although in Netanyahu's case, he actually is intending to reduce the number of Palestinians who live in Gaza by a significant amount. He'll kill some, terrorize the rest, destroy their homes, and then try to talk other countries into taking them as refugees. That is their plan. Very, very obvious, open plan. In Israel, every Israeli knows what the plan is, because it's published in their papers. It's discussed openly amongst their government.
The way the conflict is going on right now in the Middle East, in Gaza, Israel would be able to involve the US militarily in the Middle East. Is that possible? Do you find it serious?
Oh, and I think it's serious, and it could, there's all kinds of things that could happen, particularly with this, what's happening in the Red Sea, and then the off the coast of Oman. I guess there was the Iranian Navy seized a ship, and I think an Iranian warship went over into the Red Sea area. So there are potential hotspots, potential for accidents that can happen, that could be used, and potential for false flags to be created. That's really the problem. Because I think when people are honestly trying to avoid conflict and they're just posturing, that's what they do. They're very careful when they do it. A false flag, though, could be done consciously by any country or faction that was interested in expanding this war. And the only one I can think that wants to expand it is Israel. But Israel is well known for its ability to operate around the world and to do, their special forces and their intelligence is very functional and organized towards doing things outside of their own borders, whether it's an assassination or a false flag. So they could do it. Of course, the neocons or certain people in our government could also do it. There are people in our government. I want to say the U.S. military is smarter than that, in the sense that the people in the military, the leadership of the military, I think recognizes that the U.S. does not have the depth to sustain any type of long operation anywhere outside our borders. We just don't have it. We have wasted so many of our resources and our stockpiles in Ukraine, and then we're digging deep to clear out the other things, like the bunker buster bombs and that kind of thing for Israel. The technology has shifted. We use these 12 carrier battle groups that we have. They're not all in the ocean at the same time, but they are old. Even when they're modified and upgraded, they're still vulnerable to all kinds of weapons. And some of those weapons are not even state weapons. They're weapons the Houthis have. The Houthis have I'm not using the right word, but the kind of missiles that go under the water to hit you below the waterline. The Houthis have this. So they're affordable. They've bought them. Somebody's bought them for them. They're able to launch them. So it's only a matter of time, if we stay in there long enough, that something like that's going to happen to one of our major assets. Now, again, comes back to the fact that it's an election year. So if that happens, Biden himself is not going to want to get us in a war before the election, unless it's a major global war, somebody's shooting off nukes, and he can cancel the election. Now, there's been talk of that, and obviously didn't Zelensky say when you're in martial law, you can't have elections? He did that too. So that's why you can't say Biden would not launch world war, but he would do it if he thought it would cancel the election. It hadn't happened in our history before, so that would be a new thing. But yeah, we are vulnerable to be sucked into all kinds of stuff, because there's a lot of different people, different countries and different interests floating around, flying around. A lot of people don't like each other. Of course, most people don't like America over there anymore. We used to have some friends. We don't now. Now, in fact, I heard somebody say that Netanyahu has succeeded in uniting Shia and Sunni and Turk all together, able to put aside their ethnic, religious differences, some of their territorial disputes, and be on one side against Israel and the United States. So that's just not a good situation for anybody. But the neocons think that everybody is scared of the United States. They have thought this since the end of World War II, and they haven't really upgraded their thinking. They believe that the world trembles in fear of the United States military. Okay, well, the world doesn't. It hasn't for some time, but it certainly doesn't today. So this is a big problem. And that also that's a problem for us in America, because we are led by people who believe in illusion, and mistakes can be made very easily, and bad things could happen. And the American people would have very little to do with it. I mean, they would just have to suffer through it. So there's that concern. We're poorly led. But did you notice the little issue with our Secretary of Defense, who went offline to have surgery, but then he got infected, had to go back into critical intensive care, I guess, which is quite serious. And his second in command was on vacation. They told her, you need to come back. And she goes, I'm not coming back. I'll just do it on a phone call. Well, I'll tell you, that speaks to the true nature of the US military. It's very corporate. It's very corporatized. It's not a war-fighting military. It hasn't been for some time. I think we saw this in Afghanistan too. And you know, with the withdrawal, that was something that Biden doesn't want to talk about, because he was kind of, it was very sloppy, and it was very, you know, poorly done, and disaster, really. I mean, they should have withdrawn years before they did, but when they did it, it was not executed well by the military. And part of that is, I think, pretty sure, big reason it wasn't planned for like it should have been, is that the corporate leadership in the Pentagon refused to believe that they were really going to leave. They refused to do the planning. They refused to, they said, he'll change his mind, or this isn't really going to happen. Come on, seriously? We've been there 20 years. Why would we leave all of a sudden now? You know, when Trump worked the deal with the Taliban in the final, I guess it was in the last 18 months of his term, he was struggling again also with the corporate military and the corporate State Department. These guys did not want to negotiate this, and Trump himself had to do what Trump does, which is whatever he wants. But he was resisted in many different ways from by the corporate state, which really saw no reason to leave Afghanistan. And then when they did it, the military is kind of poorly led, and we saw that. So this other example over Christmas with Secretary Austin, and keeping the information hidden as to who's in charge and how it's working, just very much tells you the corporate nature of our military. It is not an offensive, it really isn't a very good offensive military, even though it's oriented that way, but it's certainly not a defensive military. It's not, you know, we think of the military as on the watch, you know, always 24/7, you know, to protect you. And what we're seeing is militaries do what the politicians want. And many militaries are quite political. And certainly October 7th in Israel, the Israelis are asking this question. You know, they know they're surrounded by enemies. They constantly bomb their neighbors just to show them they can. They were shocked that their borders were undefended, and their intelligence people acted like they had no idea, which is, of course, not true. They were informed, but they didn't take the proper defensive actions. So I would say the Israeli military is also impacted a little bit by this corporate mentality, which isn't really what soldiers are about. And it really makes it so you're not very good at self-defense. And I don't think the US military is very good at self-defense. And I'm hoping we don't have to see that proven in the Red Sea operation or elsewhere.
You know what's so amazing about this Red Sea operation? When the United States, together with Israel, went to the Red Sea to confront Houthis, these Yemenis, everybody was thinking that these Arab states like Saudi Arabia and UAE would be part of this operation, because they were fighting these Yemenis, these Houthis, before this deal being cut between Iran and Saudi Arabia. Right now, it seems that everything is changing with this support of Israel right now in the Red Sea.
The US has been militarily interfering with Iraq, certainly since 1991, with really no let up. I mean, in between the two invasions of Iraq, we were still bombing. And we have, at the same time, prior to that in the 50s, we were responsible for installing the Shah back into Iran. I mean, knocking back the democratically elected leader in Iran. That's in the late 50s. So we have a long history 70 years. 70 years is a couple generations worth. A long history of causing conflict in the Middle East and being arrogant. Now, in some ways, we took over the kind of colonial role that Britain had, that France had in Lebanon and other places. We kind of consciously, the United States intended to, why were we in Vietnam? We were in Vietnam because France was withdrawing, and this was an opportunity to slide into that colonial role in that part of the world. Oh, sure. Yeah, we want to fight communism too. Well, whatever, it's really not about that. It's about power. So in the Middle East, our history, multiple generations of people there, I don't care if they're Shia, Sunni, Lebanese Christians, whatever they are, Turks, various people and cultures, they're all seeing the same thing. Some of them are seeing it up close and personal, and some are watching it being done to their neighbors, or in the sense what's happening in North Africa. Certainly what happened to Libya was instructive to people in that region, because they see that the United States is like a bull in a china shop. It does not care. It has no strategy. It will kill your leader and occupy your country for oil, or to prevent you from going on a gold standard, or to prevent you from not trading in the dollar for your petrodollar, whatever these reasons are. And those are the reasons: resources, oil, energy, petrodollar, gold. These are the things that drive American policy, and everybody has seen it either done to them or done to their neighbors over 70 years. And guess what? That's unifying. Because when you're talking to somebody you hate, but all of a sudden you realize there's this other guy that's been mistreating you both from pretty much the same reasons, it brings you together. The other aspect of this, of course, is how extremely bad our diplomatic and military engagement has been for all these countries, because I believe the U.S. was blindsided by the agreement between Iran and Saudi Arabia just recently. I think they were totally shocked. What? That could never happen. How did that happen? Oh, it happened. It happened. And it happened relatively quickly from the American perspective, because we don't have good intelligence and we believe our own stuff. We believe our own propaganda line. And we think we're strong and that everybody wants to be associated with us, like they did maybe in the 50s. Maybe people liked us in the 50s, but we've wasted all that goodwill. And many in our government today don't understand that it's been wasted. And you can't get it back. You can't waste this goodwill that took generation to build and get it back, waste it, and then get it back in 2 years or 1 year, or let's have a meeting, we'll have a summit, and no, it doesn't come back like that. So in many ways, the colonial period for the Middle East, maybe the second colonial period, the colonial or quasi-colonial relationships that they have had with the United States are ending. And these countries, if you have teenagers or young people in your family, there comes a time when they leave the nest. They leave the nest and they go and make their own mistakes, and they go make their own lives. And I think that is what people are ready for. And if anything, this was accelerated by the devastation of war that the United States has been fomenting in that region, certainly in Iraq. What a devastated country. What an awful thing. Afghanistan, devastated. And they use depleted uranium there too. I really don't like depleted uranium. From what I've heard, it is so dangerous and so long lasting. But, we've devastated many countries, and that's what we leave behind. And we wonder why, instead of fearing us or admiring us, they really want nothing to do with us. So this is something we built. Now, Israel's reaction in Gaza, that's been a direct affront to Arabs everywhere. It's been a direct affront to subjugated peoples everywhere, because South Africa, filed their complaint, very lengthy complaint. Why would South Africa care? Well, I don't know, because they had apartheid for a long time. They had a two-class system where property ownership and all the government was one color of people, and then a majority of other people who had darker skin didn't get that. So they lived through it. I didn't live through it. I don't have a good sensitivity to how that must be, but the South Africans have emerged through that history, a very painful history. And they're still getting through it. I mean, it's not over for them. They are struggling. But they recognize some of their struggle, and they always did, with the way the Palestinians are treated by the Zionist government. So, you know, it's really only natural that they would come forth with this complaint, because anybody that studies the region could have made that complaint. European countries could have made that complaint, because they used to say, the European countries all used to say, you know, we're all about human rights and democracy. Well, clearly they're not, but it had to be the South Africans that did that. The rest of the world sees it, certainly Middle East sees it for what it is. And it's very ugly. It's very, it's arrogant, it's hateful, it's an ethnic and religious superiority complex. And we are wholly associated with Israel in what Israel is doing in Gaza. We have said nothing except, we said a few things. We vetoed twice any call for a ceasefire. We did that. We watered down the amendment that did pass, but we abstained from voting for it because our Israeli masters didn't want us to. I'm sure we will. Well, I already know this. Blinken has made a speech condemning the complaint that was drawn up by the South African delegation. He out of hand rejected it. No way. This has no truth to it whatsoever, even though it does have truth. It's based on, you know, objective reality that we can measure. But you know, the American position is very much tied with Israel. So in some ways, you know, Israel has made money for us. Israel has helped us do some of the colonial projects that we have pursued in the Middle East. They've been part and parcel to it, really, for many years. And so we're yoked with Israel. We are hooked in the harness with them. And if Israel goes down, or I don't mean goes down as a country, but if its stature and respect for Israel goes down, same happens to us. We are viewed by the world as an enabler, and really our government is in full agreement with what Israel wants. This idea that we've advocated in the United States for a two-state solution, that's not true. That's not true. I don't know if we mentioned this before, but it happened in the fall where this guy got in an altercation in New York. Turned out he was a former state. He had an altercation with an Arab guy. I don't even think he was Palestinian. I'm not sure, but they were the guy that caused the problem said that was at that point 4,000 children. 4,000 children was the death number of children in Palestine. So this was at least 2 months ago. He said that's not enough, you know, and so somebody videoed it in this age of the internet and all that. So it turns out that individual, I can't remember his name, had worked in the State Department. And what did he work on? He worked on the development and the advocacy of a two-state solution. Well, how would a guy who believes as that guy believes, why would you put him on that position of pursuing a two-state solution, which he clearly doesn't want? He clearly believes there should not be a two-state solution. Israel owns the land and all these Palestinians should die or leave. If that's what he believes. And yet that's who we had working on it. That's one example. I mean, there's many examples. I know other people that worked on in the State Department and in the military on this, and it's nothing but lip service. We did not want two states. It's whatever Israel wants, we will support. They don't want a two-state solution. They want a one-state solution with a small minority of Palestinians, enough to mow the grass and clean the swimming pools and maybe work in the gardens, you know, work on the farms. That's it. They only need 10%. They do not want what they have, which is 20-something%. And demographically, that number continues to grow. So they're not a democracy. It is an ethnic state. It's a religious state. And to maintain that, they have to kill Palestinians and they have to kill Arabs and they have to drive them away. So that's what they're doing, and we're supporting it. So this idea that Blinken says, oh, we're still supporting a two-state, we have never supported a two-state solution. And, you know, I think that came about under Carter, at the end of Carter's era. I'm not sure, President Carter. He was the one before Reagan. And I think Carter, at the Camp David talks and all that, that was when they brought up this two-state thing. Well, if you know anything about American politics, do you think Carter, first off, a one-term president, a Democrat peanut farmer from Atlanta, from Georgia. Was he, first off, was he part of the inside team? No, he's kind of like Trump. He was a much nicer version of Trump. He was a liberal version of Trump, but he was very much a country boy, not part of the deep state, not part. They did not respect him. Carter is a smart guy. He was always smart. He was a nuclear sub officer. You know, I mean, the guy's brilliant, but he was not respected. And so if you say two-state solution comes from Carter in his third year, maybe fourth, and immediately he is no longer in the presidency. He loses the election to Reagan. And like that is going to sustain our policy? No, because the deep state has been with us longer than that. They didn't want a two-state solution. And all of the talk, it infuriates me to hear them say this in the media. Oh, we want a two-state solution. We don't. We want whatever Israel wants. And we are tied and yoked to Israel's. What they're doing in Gaza, we are doing it. So guess what? There's consequences for that. There are consequences. When you make grave errors and you commit crimes, there are consequences. That's Israel's facing them now. And we are facing them too.
You know, one of the issues that presidential candidates in the United States are talking about are these partnership between China and Russia. It seems that it's going to be so important when it comes to Taiwan, because if Russia supports China in Taiwan, United States would not be able to do anything substantial in that region. In your opinion, with the support that Russia received from the global South, specifically China, would the United States, whoever going to be the next president of the United States, be able to separate Russia from China? Is that possible? Is that delusional? What they're talking
It's delusional. I think it's delusional. Although, you know, if you look at everything, and we need to have a realistic view, you know, realpolitik kind of thing. What is it that, you know, they say countries don't have friends. They don't. Nations don't have friends. They have shared interests or they have diverging interests. Russia and China have very many shared interests. There's no doubt about that. And they've had some barriers to that, which are being broken down. The United States' actions have certainly accelerated the pushing together or the opening of doors, building of bridges between China and Russia and the global South and Russia and the global South and China, which of course China was China trades with everybody. They manufacture for everybody. There are Chinese people in every country doing all kinds of good things, whether they're doing it for the Chinese government or doing it for, because they're industrious. It's hard to say, but many people don't have a bad view of China. They don't have a terrible view. Many Americans do, because we've been cultured to hate China for this and that. I mean, back to Vietnam, there's that part. And then, of course, communism. We don't like communism. America is very communistic. We're probably better communism. We probably do communism better than a lot of people do that don't admit it. But we say, oh, the Chinese are communist. And then we say, well, the Chinese are an autocratic dictator. Didn't Biden, after his meeting in San Francisco with Xi, then like 5 minutes after they separated, he goes, yeah, Xi is a dictator. And the Chinese are like, get over it, because they could legitimately say that Biden is a dictator, but we throw these words around in this country and we create enemies where honestly none exist. Now, many Americans, average people, we are a consumer-oriented society, even though our economy is not doing so well, but we buy things. And where are most of the things that we buy manufactured? In China. They really are. And increasingly, you have other rim countries, Pacific Rim company. Increasingly, we see things made in India, Bangladesh. There are all kinds of products. Certainly when it comes to our meat and food products, we get a lot from South America. So, we are, the average American consumer likes Chinese goods because we're used to them. We've been buying them for 30 or 40 years. They generally are good products. And actually, I remember when I of course was little, but when we first used to trade with some Asian countries, made in Taiwan, and of course we have a lot of things made in Taiwan today, but back in the old days, made in China or made in Taiwan meant that it was really terrible. It was cheap. It would break easily. It was junk. made in Japan. Made in Japan used to be junk. Now, made in Japan, yeah, I'm buying that car. Now, of course, what we also see is Japan has put factories in the United States, and they're made in America by Japanese countries, Honda, whatever, all these various, South Korea does the same thing. In China, we've resisted that a little bit. But ultimately, that's the pattern that should happen. Things will flow and develop. And if we had peace, we would see more Chinese-owned companies here. Now, the government, Biden and Trump, same person in this regard. They are the same. Oh, China can't own agricultural land. China can't own a factory. Oh, there was a Chinese-owned factory that did some pharmaceutical, some COVID tests or something, and it was a wreck. It was contaminated. The China virus, right? The COVID, the whole thing, very much an anti-China propaganda thing, because actually the U.S. is pretty responsible for the gain of function. We know this. We didn't know this at the time of COVID at the beginning, but we have found this out later. But it was a great opportunity to blame China and to cause Americans to say, oh, we don't want anything to do with China. But in fact, the Chinese economy and the American economy are closely entwined, and that hasn't changed. It's just the superficial language around it. So if we really wanted to do anything to China, first off, if you hurt your trading partner, you hurt yourself. So it would hurt us. It would hurt American consumers if we said, oh, no more China stuff. And by trying to hurt China, it makes them more likely to embrace their neighbors, including Russia, for all kinds, for markets and resources. So we really can't separate China from ourselves or anybody else. So we don't have that leverage. What can we do with Russia? Can we separate Russia from China? Well, what have we tried to do? What are our tools in our tool basket? Our toolkit? Well, sanctions. That doesn't work. The sanctions have made Russia bigger, stronger, faster, and more friendly with all the neighbors, including China. So sanctions don't work. What else could we do? Well, I don't know. Kill Putin? Kill Putin, and that would do? No, that wouldn't work. That wouldn't work. So everything the United States might want to do to put a wedge between Russia and China doesn't work. It doesn't work in part because of our economies being entwined with the Chinese economy. And we're actually not that entwined with the Russian economy, which we, in theory, should be much more, we should trade much more with Russia. They have huge things that Americans need and want, and we should be trading with them. But because we're not, we have no leverage whatsoever to separate them, okay? Now, if we traded with Russia and China at an equal level, then we could play a game to see if we could drive them apart or, bring a market share or entice, stop with the Chinese and bring the Russians in and make the Chinese angry, trade with, but we refuse to deal with the Russians and we bad talk the Chinese constantly. So everything we do brings them together and puts a gap between the United States and both of those countries and their allies. And the rest of the world watches this and they go, well, this is how the US behaves. Maybe we want to keep our distance. And if the dollar crashes or becomes, if this 34 trillion debt turns into a $50 trillion debt, of course, 34 trillion can't be paid back. There's no way. It'd have to be written down. But if it goes higher, it'll most likely go much higher before they write it down. But when they do that, again, the other countries say, well, I don't want to own that debt. So they look not just today, but down the road. And it's like the US is losing friends and we're losing our influence with other countries. So while they might want to do it, it's stuck inside of the DC think tanks. Okay, talk bad about China, talk bad about Russia. Oh, let's put a wedge between the two of them. It's not rational. It is not supported by any tools that we can actually bring to bear. So I don't know what they're going to do when they realize this. This is something you'd have to be concerned about because of the nuclear weapons. Because when a country is poorly led, and ours has been for a long time, and it has very few tools that work, and our tools in the past our soft power and our military power used to work a little bit. They don't work anymore. We're seeing that. I mean, the Houthis are fighting the American military and winning. Okay. I'm sorry. That doesn't say much for your military. But it's happening. So we don't have the tools we used to have, but we do have one tool, and that would be a nuclear weapon. If we are insane enough to do that, you can't rule out. I don't think you can rule out that possibility. But what likely will happen is if an America First type, let's say Trump gets back in office or something like that, if we focus on our own problems, we can regain respect in the rest of the world. But right now, we have not been doing that, and we're paying the price for it.
You know, just to wrap up this session, I want to talk about Europe, because in this whole game between Russia, China, and the United States, Europe would be a very important region for this connection between the United States and Russia.
Yeah.
Do you think with what has happened to the Nord Stream pipeline, is the United States willing to let Europe restart their relations with Russia?
I don't think the US wants to allow that. One of the reasons, think about the cover-up after the Nord Stream pipeline, and I'm pretty sure the Americans did it. I go with what Cy Hirsch says. He's pretty reliable. I think his story makes the most sense. So I believe it was us that did it, maybe some help with a few other players, but we did it. And President Biden, when he said we can end it, he said this publicly, and 3 months later he did it. I mean, pretty obvious. He wouldn't have said that. He's actually, because he is mentally incompetent, he's senile. He blurts out things. And I don't know if you've ever known anybody with dementia, right? Biden has early onset dementia. There's no doubt. I'm not a doctor, but I'm pretty sure he's got that. But anyway, people who with dementia, they lose some of their they say what they think. They say what they believe to be true, or they repeat what they have been told. And when he said that, it was either I believe it, I have been told this, I'm going to do this. Very honest, very honest. And the people hearing him say that were taken aback, his own people, because you're not supposed to say that. Biden wasn't supposed to say that, but he said it because he's demented. And it's a good thing. So we did this, but the bad thing, and what we saw is those governments particularly Germany's government, but also others, all played cover. They all covered for the American action. That was an assault on Germany's energy supplies. It was a direct attack on Russia. And of course, we don't want to admit that it was an attack on Russia because the United States didn't want to go head to head with Russia. We wanted this proxy war in Ukraine, and that's it. But Germany covered up for that, even though it was at great cost to Germany. And I think part of this is the influence of the Green Party, which is insane in terms of, we don't use, and seriously, it was gas. Natural gas is about as clean as you're going to get, but it still comes from the ground. They don't like that. So, but it's not just political with Germany. There was something else going on there. And they were willing to hurt their own economy, hurt their own people, and cover for the United States. And as the word got out amongst capitals as to what happened, and I'm sure different capitals may come to different conclusions about who did it, but as everyone knew this, then Germany loses respect because everybody knows, why would you must really be beholden to the United States to allow that kind of destruction of your own economy, much less them requiring them to fund Ukraine, and that kind of thing. So, but what we see happening I think it was the political leadership of the EU and the political leadership of the various major states in Europe, which allowed this. As these European countries elect new leaders, and we're seeing them do it, and who are they pulling from? Well, they're pulling from the populist right. That's where they're selecting their leadership. And that populist right is saying, I'm putting my country first. In fact, one of the guys, I forget who the one guy was, I don't know if it was the Netherlands or not, but anyway, they elected what I call conservative, a populist right-winger, I guess. I don't know the party name.
Netherlands.
The Netherlands there. And the Netherlands are saying, we're calling for Nexit. Now, when I heard Nexit, I thought the next one, but it's the Netherlands exit, just like, the Brexit was. But this, what we're seeing happen is, as the voice of the people is expressed in the governments of the countries there, they will assert their interests, and their interests are not being served by the EU as it is currently led. And they're not being served by NATO as it's currently led either. So I think we'll see Europe, partly because of what we have done to Europe on purpose. And again, we talked earlier, about the impetus of money, of controlling markets, whether it's defense markets or energy markets. What we are, in our attempt to control these markets, we are actually accelerating a normal change in many of these countries. And that change will harm NATO, which is good because NATO is not doing anything useful. But more and more people will say the emperor has no clothes as they look at what the benefit of NATO is. It's not there. When they look at the benefit of EU, they'll say, you know what, I think we could do better without it. And there's many countries that we're seeing, small countries like the Netherlands, Hungary, a number of others, and even the Italian election of last year. She's very controlled by the EU and by NATO, and but when she ran for the election, much as Zelensky did, she ran on a platform of peace, and we're not going to participate in this. Now, as soon as she was elected, they put the screws to her or whatever, she changes her mind. But the people themselves, as they begin to assert their interests for their countries, I think it's going to go in a good direction. And that is a good market. Although Europe has changed. I mean, the productivity of European countries, the demographics has changed so much. And immigration is a problem in many of these countries too, because they have they have a welfare state. So the immigrants come in, and we have a little bit of this in our country, but because we do provide aid to all of our immigrants. But in Europe, they've got multiple generations of immigrants. And certainly France is a prime example of this, where you have whole ghettos of North Africans and others who are basically on the dole, and their children are on the dole, and then they get married and have kids, and they're on the, so they're creating a subclass of dependents who aren't really contributing to the strengthening of the French economy. And you're seeing this in other countries too. So they all have problems they have to deal with. But if you're going broke, what do? I mean, you tighten your belt. How do you tighten your belt if you're a European country? Well, first off, you stop going to war because somebody else wants you to do it, and it's not in your interest. You stop paying for all the clubs. They talk about in America, we're all going broke, so all the streaming services people are stopping, instead of streaming 10 services, they're now streaming, 2 or 3. Well, in Europe, the streaming services that they need to stop, and they will stop, are things like the EU, dues to the EU, salaries for the EU infrastructure, all that, and the NATO. Well, we don't need the NATO. It's a cost we simply can no longer afford. And as the people in those countries decide that, this has the effect of pushing back the United States indirectly. And I don't think we can do much about it in the US because we don't have the money. Now, if we didn't have a $34 trillion debt, we could prop up NATO completely indefinitely. We could prop up the EU. We prop up the Ukrainian government salaries. We've been paying them for 2 years out of the taxpayer dole. So there's things you can do if you have the resources. But the United States has wasted so much of its power, so much of its economy. We've really shot ourselves in the foot so much. And so we can't expect to be this important influencer of whether it be Europe or any other country, China, Russia, Israel, anybody. We're just another country dealing with problems. That's what we've turned into.